Hello and welcome to my channel. Well, this video is basically inspired by Morte. He put up in a comment there, he said, why don't you do a video about different kind of axes and batoning. I'll have to look at his comment to refresh my memory, but batoning wood with knives, axes, saws, and stuff like that. What are my thoughts on it? I think is what his comment something was based upon. So what I'm going to put it on is my thoughts basically about batoning wood with knives. When would I do it? Would I do it? Advantages, disadvantages, stuff like that. Now, I'd like to say that I'm an old guy now, and I spend a lot of time, not, like crazy amount of time, but whenever I could, I spend a time out in the wood. We'd go camping and stuff like that, the family would go out. And back then it was, a big Wenzel or some kind of like tent, family type of tent. And there'd be a Coleman stove out there, so you really didn't have to cook out of making a stove. But a lot of times you'd have a campfire. They'd allow a campfire because that's the cool part, about. I mean, if you want a stove, you got one of those in every house. There's a stove there, A lot of times it was gas. We had a gas stove, so if you wanted to look at fire and cook food, what's the thrill of that? Well, going out and camping, part of it is building a fire. Now, throughout that whole time, not once, not ever, not once in my entire life back then did I see my father, my grandfather, anybody I'd seen around me, baton wood. Not once. Now, a lot of times that may have to do with where you grew up and your conditions and stuff. Part of the time I grew up was in Michigan, but not for long, and most of it was in, we moved in '64 down to Houston, Texas from Michigan when my father went to Vietnam. So, if you know anything about Houston, Texas, it's flat. It was, we're in the outskirts of the city, but now it's been incorporated. It's part of the city of Houston. Harris County, I was in Harris County, which is in the northwestern part of Houston. So it's pine woods and stuff like that. There's not really a lot of trees and stuff like that. But you know how we made fires? You take little sticks, which are around in every forest and everything else, and you take those, the same place where you got your big logs and everything, and you build up your fire that way, with the small ones. You get your tinder, your spark, your flame, and you build it up. And if you wanted later on, you were doing something and you wanted to continue to fuel the flame, you never beat on your knife. Never once. That was considered, like, it's a good way to mess it up. Like, these will probably handle it, but it's probably a rat tail type of tang that goes down to something that's screwed in leather. And if you're gonna hit there and baton on it, and you happen to whack back here, it's a good way to bend or break your knife. Same with this, this is like a survival knife that incorporates a saw. That particular saw was really made for aluminum aircraft skin and stuff like that more than wood, but it can work as like notching. But if you wanted to cut wood, there's always saws, Saws are quiet. The thing I don't like about batoning knives is it became a fad. It became a thing. And knives started becoming where they had to be able to withstand being abused, or they were considered junk. Like I saw one where somebody batoned with this, and they hit it back here, and it bent, and they go, "These knives are junk." No, what you did was not what the knife was designed to do. It wasn't designed to baton wood. And again, the whole thing is, all right, yeah, I can see, you know, like these are heavy. You know, this is heavy. And if you're carrying around, if you had a big Bowie knife, you know, that could do some chopping. Let me get one. I just reached in and grabbed a Bowie. It just happened to be this one because, you know, anytime I get to show off a case of Bowie and play around with it. With one of these, yeah, you could leave your hatchet behind, but remember, this is good as a hammer for doing tent pegs. Man, I was tongue-tied there. All of these are different tools, right? A hatchet or an axe, a saw, and a knife. You know, when you're starting to chop with one of these, yeah, it's got enough weight, you know, and you can do some chopping with it. But I would say more like small limbs and stuff like that, more like a machete type of use. Splitting logs, splitting wood, and making kindling down to it like that. Yeah, if you want to do it, fine. But my objection to all of this is that all of a sudden they started deciding that the knife had to be full tang. Everything had to be full tang. You know, it has to be full tang, and it has to be thick. And one of the examples is the Joker. Is it the Joker? The Nesmuk. Yeah, I think it's the Joker. I'll try to find it if I can, but right now I'm just using it as an example. It has a really thick spine. You know, it has a Nesmuk shape, but it has a really thick spine. And then it comes down, you know, it's almost like this. It's like a Scandi. If you look at the real original, you know, go back into history and everything, it was a skinning knife. It wasn't designed to baton and do that all the stuff that if you wanted to split. I better watch out. I am barefoot, and man, if that buoy came down, I could easily lose a foot or pieces of it. If you wanted to chop through something like an animal's leg or something like that, you got an axe or, you know, a saw. You don't necessarily have to. And as far as like wood, processing wood, here are your wood processing tools. This is light. This is really light. I mean, you can get a light saw where you just carry just a blade and you make like a box saw out of it, out of wood. You make the rest, you know, the pieces of it as you go. And an axe is pretty handy. It depends, like I said, on where you're at, your environment. You know, here in Texas, it's like there's not, you know, we got oaks and stuff like that. There's a variety of trees, but a lot of times it depends on where you're at. East Texas, it's piney woods and thickets and stuff like that. West Texas, Texas is big. It's like a desert and stuff. You know, there's cactus and everything else. North Texas, kind of flat. I haven't spent a lot of time up in the Panhandle. It's kind of desolate up there. And South Texas is, you know, beach, Galveston, Houston, you know, and stuff like that. It gets to be more flat, humid, wet, hot, you know, because of the latitude and everything else. But still, not once, not ever, to make a fire did I need to split wood down. Now, I could see, like I said, you're sitting by a campfire, you know, and you've watched a lot of YouTube videos and everything, and you've got a knife that's full tang or whatever, and for some reason this piece of wood is too thick. Now, a lot of times I giggle and think about that. It's too thick. Maybe you brought a bunch of wood with you, you know, some firewood with you, and you're at a campsite that has no trees or anything else to burn, and you've got one of those little cook fires going, and you need something small to fit through the hole. I can see that, you know, that you would want to, you know, baton something like that. Fine, go ahead and do it, you know. But what you've got to keep in mind one thing, and that is whenever you're batoning, keep in mind what kind of knife you're using. You know, if what you're trying to baton is huge and thick, you're using the wrong tool for the job. Use a hatchet. Or if you don't have one, why? Ask yourself again, why? Why are you trying to process everything with one tool? Is it because you failed to bring it, just because you failed to bring it, or it's the only thing you got? Well, then, yeah, do what you got to do, man. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible or it's impractical or anything like that. It's just my whole thing behind it is a knife does not have to be designed to be able to withstand batoning and to be a good knife, in my opinion. You know, you could baton with a slip joint or a folder. Yeah, just don't do it like this. Just never hit it back here. Break its action and put it like this and beat on it like that if you want to. But just keep in mind, whenever you beat on a knife, even a fixed blade and stuff like that, especially if you're using something other than wood. I've seen people, beat on them, like torture test them, beat them on the back of a metal pole and stuff like that, like Joe X does. That's different. He's testing them to failure. A lot of what he does you would consider knife abuse and stuff. But that's the whole purpose of it, until it fails, He's not going to get that way by cutting through paper and cardboard. It'd take a long time for a knife to fail. But, like again, what my opinion is, you have these other tools. And if you're not using them, and you're using your knife, and the knife fails because you're using a knife in a way it wasn't designed, then it's not the knife's problem. Let's put it that way. It's the nicest way I can put it. It's not the knife's problem. Ask Pepe. He got his second feather for, good behavior or whatever. But yeah, you do what you want to do. But if you're out there and you're trying to, I'm going to survive with just one tool and everything, I can see the logic behind it, Carrying a big old axe and everything, or a hatchet's kind of heavy. But I mean, if you're anticipating that you're going to have to process a lot of wood or make firewood, then carry one of those. Also, when you're batoning, think about making a wedge, and beating, instead of like, this is not big enough as a baton, but I mean, when you're doing that, I could feel it. It's reverberating through the handle. You're sending shockwaves through your knife. And for what? What? You would not normally get that in cutting. Yeah, if you were in a fight and you ran into bone, you might feel a little shock or whatever. That's different. But repetitive banging, and then there's knots, there's torques. You've seen knives fail when they're doing non-knife work, is what I would say. Yeah, you could do knives. It's no problem doing carving, and whittling and all that other stuff. But again, why? Show me one place, one forest where you needed to do this. Now I can understand, yeah. If it's wet, it's been raining, and you didn't know how to make a fire in the wet without trying to get into the soft part of a thing like this, all you got to do on a stick and everything is carve off the bark, and then you'll start running into dry wood, and then when you do, this is fat wood. I mean, but you basically get your little pieces together, and then however you're going to make your spark and flame, you get that going, and then the size of the wood after that does not necessarily have to be, I mean, you don't want to take a big log and you've got a little flame down here. You got a little flame in that little Pepe Rules area right there going, and you put a big old log on it. Well, you've got more problems than, you need to do some basic bushcraft and understand how to build a fire before you get any further. Little steps, work at one thing at a time. You'll get to your batoning sooner or later. Again, I disagree with the whole concept of batoning, but I can understand when it might be practical, when you might have to use it. My objection is that the logic that starts to go behind, where every knife has to be made to withstand. Buy a knife for what it's made to use for. If it's going to be a kitchen knife and you're not going to be batoning through everything, then they can be light and they can be thin, and they do an excellent job at what they're supposed to do, which is processing meat. That's why a lot of the stuff that you saw in the Old West, was one of the reasons, is because of availability was kitchen knives. A lot of them were adapted to use in out in the field and stuff like that. So there you go. Yeah, if I had this, I wouldn't need a machete. I already feel like I've got, like a little short machete. It's still not quite long enough. Really, just find the proper tool for the job. But to me, beating on a knife is abuse, and there's no law against it other than if it breaks and you whine about it. Well, then I think the whining should be, why are you whining? When you have other tools, that work better for splitting up wood. That's all I'm saying. You think about what you're trying to do. Split up wood. Why? Why are you splitting up wood? Well, you need little pieces to make a fire. All right. Try making a fire without batoning. I bet you can do it. I bet you would be able to do it. Now, again, if you got something that needs to be fed through a little opening, and you don't want a real big log to go through there, and you can't figure it out, it's like Tetris or something. It's a forest. You can't figure out how to fit a little peg into a hole. Eventually, I think you would figure it out if you spend enough time out in the woods. But there you go. I mean, that's a quick one. It's kind of a desktop thing. I'm not out there, chopping down. I don't have a forest to play around in and stuff like that, or I would. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. We'll get to different again, hatchets, you can do the same thing. This one's a competition type throwing one. It still would be good for, it's sharp. It's sharp as hell. It still would be good as a hatchet type of thing. But it's not as good as if you wanted one more for like combat. You'd have more of a tomahawk shape. That possibly instead of a hammer on this end, you would have a spike, and this would be more curved, and then you've got other, it's almost endless, all the different types of shapes and uses of knives and stuff and everything. But again, the right tool for the job. If you're sitting there and you're using your knife when you should be using a crowbar or a real screwdriver, and the tip of your knife breaks, well, should we make all knives tips so thick that just anybody, should we make it GI proof or idiot proof, so that just anybody can pick it up and use it improperly and it won't break? Well, you're going to wind up with jack of all trades, master of none, You're going to wind up, that's how we wound up with the round scissors, because, kids are running with pointy scissors. So now you don't have pointy scissors anymore, you have to be round. And I think a lot of these really thick, overly heavy design knives were designed for people overthinking stuff, like a lot of the survival knives were like, it's your only knife and it's got to do everything. Well, yeah, if it's your only knife and it's got to do everything, then it's going to be overbuilt. And then everything that you're trying to incorporate it, it's like when the military gets a government contract for a fighter, like, we need a close air support fighter, like, hey, we need something like that. And they start saying, well, we needed to do this too, and this too, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that. And, that's why they really railed against the A-10 Warthog so much, because it wasn't as fast as these other ones. Well, no, yeah, because they had more lordy time, they could stick around. It turned out to be a damn good aircraft, but it was resisted even by the Air Force itself, and they wanted the more expensive, fancy, glamorous, jets that could do multi-roll, all kinds of stuff. And what they really needed was close air support. Get in there close. Before we had prop jobs flying around and flying up close. So the right tool for the job. It's going to be specialized a lot of times. But you go ahead and smack wood away all you want. And if the blade bends and everything. I used to be against people, I just think, why would you ever do that? People would stab a tip in and bend it and everything. And then throwing knives. I found that out from throwing knives into wood, that if you throw it wrong, if you're not throwing it straight, where it lands like this, but it lands sideways, guess what you just did? you threw a knife in hard. And again, throwing a knife is abuse also a lot of times because the shock wave, of it can shake handles loose and stuff like that. But that will also tell you about a good tip test is if you throw the knife sideways into wood and it goes like this and it's still all right afterwards, well, then you got a good tip. And a lot of people would say, why would you ever throw your knife? Because you can. I mean, that's why I understand the logic behind batoning too. I'm not totally rabidly against it. Like I said, you do what you want to do with your knives. The only time I'm ever going to be splitting wood like that is if I have to. I mean, it really is an emergency, like for some unknown reason. All I had was a knife on me. Even one of these, if it had like a rat tail tang or something like this. If you know what you're doing, these are not the best, because a lot of times it's sharpened up here. It's just this is where you're gonna be smacking. And you smack back here, you don't smack here on this type of knife. But you're limited, again, as to the size, really. If I'm trying to cut through wood that's bigger than this, by double this width, all right, yeah, so we can say it's double this width, all right, that's a decent size, amount to be splitting down. I could see how that's too thick to get through your little porthole, and you don't have any other sticks around, and you want to use that. But that's the only time. A regular round campfire, you just take a big log and you put it in the middle, and guess what? Eventually the fire burns through, and you just fold it in, and you have more flame. It's not rocket science. Like I said, we never needed the baton, but again, go ahead and baton away, the baton core, go ahead. That's all I ever saw batons was in they'd twirl them, in football games and stuff. They'd have somebody sit there and, very good. I think one of my sisters was practicing one time, be on a cheerleader squad or something. It was probably my older sister. And I remember for sure one of my sisters had batons. They were glittery and they had rubber on the end, and they'd throw them up in the air. That's the only batoning. That's the only batoning I ever remember from my childhood and stuff. Now, granted, again, I live in Houston, I live in a city. We were on a farm, basically a small farm. We had 1 acre of land that the house was on, so right there it was bigger than what you would find in a subdivision. Although it was considered a subdivision, considered recreation acres subdivision. But every house had, like at least 1 acre of land. And they were all different. There was no housing authority. But anyways, I rambled on long enough. That's my thought on batoning and saws and hatchets, or axes and wood, processing wood. So, yeah. Every piece of wood counts. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.